morning. Welcome to Lifting Your Spirit, a monthly show in which we interview people about their spiritual lives and their sharing ways of lifting the spirit. I'm Reverend Joel Grossman, Interfaith Minister, Director of Spiritual Services for Constellation Hospice in Newburyport, and I offer spiritual coaching virtually on a donation basis.
And I'm Ted Jones, a meditation teacher at North Shore Insight Meditation Center.
Our show is based on the following four principles. Everyone is spiritual. Sometimes we are conscious and active regarding our spirituality, sometimes not. But even when we're not, we still have a spirit.
There are many ways to lift your spirit, not only through religious practices, but also through nature, art, human relationships, service to others, to name just a few.
Each person's spiritual path is unique and may change over time in small or large ways.
It's important to respect your spiritual journey, trusting that one step leads to another, and to respect the uniqueness of other people's spiritual journey, regardless of how different it may be from your own. We're not here to convince you of any benefits of any particular method or approach, but rather just here to offer some food for thought.
Our guest today is Alex Matthews, spiritual leader of the Congregation Ahavas Achim in Newburyport, and in 2 weeks, Rabbi Alex. And for full disclosure, I have to say that he is my rabbi and spiritual leader. Alex has been a part of the Congregation Ahavas Achim community since 2015, has been serving as congregational leader since 2019. Alex will be ordained as a rabbi on June 4th at Hebrew College in Newton. Alex brings a deep love of Torah, Jewish tradition, and community building to the Newburyport synagogue and community. After graduating from Cornell University in 2009, Alex spent a few years working and adventuring. We will want to hear more about that a bit. In Peru with the Peace Corps, then hiking the Appalachian Trail in its entirety. Although he grew up on the edge of New York City, farming and outdoor life sparked a passion, and Alex spent the last 7 years managing vegetable farms in Northeast Mass, while living in Newburyport since 2015. The understanding that so much of Torah is deeply rooted in agriculture and community helped bring Alex back into the fold of Jewish life and inspired him to become more deeply involved in Congregation Ahavas Achim community. He brings a wealth of Jewish knowledge with him to the job, and I can certainly attest to that. So thanks for being here, Alex.
Yeah, of course. Thank you both so much for having me. And Joel, it's great to always see you. And Ted, I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better.
Same here.
So Alex, we always start our program asking our guests to share about their spiritual history.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to be sitting in this seat in this moment and hearing that question, because it kind of serves as a bookend for me. As I was preparing to enroll in school and take the job 4 years ago, Mary Jacobson had me on the morning show. Really, like in this very spot. And,
Right.
and she, I don't remember exactly what her question was, but it had to do with my own spirituality. And I still remember my answer, which makes me cringe a little bit, but my answer was actually kind of, a lot of people identify themselves as spiritual but not religious, and I actually, for most of my life, identified myself as religious but not spiritual. I was raised in a pretty traditional Jewish home and community. We went to a conservative synagogue every Saturday, sometimes multiple times a day on Saturday. and I went to a private parochial Jewish day school in the modern Orthodox movement. So most of my upbringing and religious and Jewish education was really focused on skill building and study, and really not focused on spiritual depth, spiritual development. So I was, from a very young age, kind of given the tools to participate in Jewish life, really without much of a prompt to figure out what any of that meant to me personally, or how to make it kind of more deeply meaningful. And that was really kind of all that I thought was out there for the most of the first 30-ish years of my life. And I was either in situations where I was so deeply embedded in Jewish community and Jewish culture that I didn't think there was anything else out there. Or, like when I was in the Peace Corps in Peru, and even for some of my times working on farms, felt like I was the only Jew in a 20 or 50 mile radius. And so it didn't necessarily feel like there was anywhere in between. It felt very all or nothing to me. And it was really kind of only once I started getting more exposed to and integrated in the Jewish community here in Newburyport where I realized that like a religious identity can be part of an identity and not the only, or even not the overriding or the only part of my identity. And it was then that kind of the door opened a little bit to, you either do it all or you do nothing, or, you do as much as you can, but then you feel guilty for all the things you're not doing. I was able to kind of finally move away from that a little bit and start to focus a little bit more on what are the things that make me feel connected to the communities around me. What are the things that make me feel connected to a sense of divinity in the world, and really kind of a focus more on what are the things that bring the most meaning, as opposed to what are the things I'm not doing that feel the most guilty.
Nice switch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that sense of growing up in a conservative Jewish household, and that it seems like a tremendous amount of structure around that. I grew up, and I noticed that you were outside New York growing up. I grew up in Manhattan as a Catholic, and that what you were saying kind of brought back how structured that was in terms of going to catechism classes and learning a lot of rote material, which I later kind of rebelled against and dropped out, and that there seems to be, to me, a sort of aridness in much of conventional religion, and that when getting back to what you were saying about the difference between being religious, being spiritual, and it seems like there was sort of a turning point somewhere for you. Is that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the one thing that I want to push back on a little bit, if you don't mind, Ted, is just that word aridness struck me a little bit, just in terms of I grew up in an incredibly warm and caring community that was really deeply rooted in their religious practice, right? And I didn't necessarily feel that spiritual part, but I also, there was a lot of richness and warmth, and if not necessarily kind of things that I could identify as spiritual seeking, but certainly a lot of, engaging conversation and expertise in different topics and different facets of, Jewish thought and study. So that word specifically, you might have touched a nerve a little bit, but
great. I thank you for saying that. I mean, because I think that points to a sort of difference between how we each grew up. That I didn't really identify in Catholicism with any sense of community. You know, it was sort of, well, you go to church, you go to confession, go to communion, you go to catechism class, and that later was like, well, why was I doing this? What is it about? It sounds like there was a real richness to your experience growing up, which is
and
that's
actually,
beautiful.
I'm coming off just this past weekend. I was back in my parents have lived in the same house for 40 plus years, and just this past weekend I went to go stay with them and actually delivered the sermon at the synagogue I grew up in,
beautiful.
kind of surrounded by people who had seen me there every Saturday since I was, yay high. So yeah, that warmth really was really important, and I think one of the things, one of the challenges, I think a challenge in a little bit in what you're talking about is when it comes to, certainly when it comes to religious practice, there's somewhat of like a chicken or egg thing that I feel, right? Like that really intensive experience and education that I received, certainly I think it was a little bit dry in terms of the spiritual development, but it also gave me a really, really strong grounding and skill set, right, in Jewish practice, Jewish text, Jewish thought, so that when I came back to it, 15, 20 years later, it was all right here ready for me to, take it and run, in a way that if I didn't have that background, and I see this with my peers in rabbinical school, like, a lot of them who don't have that background have had to work a lot harder on building blocks that were just kind of given to me as a child. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see kind of what I took for granted as a kid and the way that it comes back to me, and how fortunate I am to have that. And I think that, in a lot of ways, has allowed me to open the doors more easily on some of the spiritual development side of things, because I don't need to focus on, brushing up my Hebrew reading skills or learning, the 5 books of Moses of the Torah in depth for the first time in my 20s and 30s.
Oh, I find that very interesting. That's really cool. I'm wondering in the rabbinical school whether there are some candidates who really didn't grow up in a household that was very deeply religious at all, or whether there is, because sometimes I meet people who really have grown up in a non-practicing Jewish household, and then they want to really dive in. And I'm wondering if even people who are in rabbinical school are.
Yeah, and so I think the easiest answer that I can give you to that is that I have several classmates who are Jews by choice, right? Who converted to Judaism. In their 20s, and so really having no. I'm sure they had some exposure, but obviously no formal Jewish background whatsoever. So it's certainly, I think it is a path of discovery that can happen at any point. I think in my current work, working with folks of any age who are interested, who something in Judaism has sparked their interest, and whether they're just interested in learning more, or whether they're on a path to conversion, is really rewarding because of that ability to kind of start from scratch and not have kind of whatever deeply ingrained or kind of family history or sometimes even obligation. Like it helps to kind of see things through really kind of completely fresh set of eyes.
Yeah.
So I'd like to take the conversation a little bit different direction, also playing off the term arid. Your background before training to be a rabbi and leading a congregation was in farming. And I'd be interested to hear the relationship of the two and the spirituality that you felt from nature and farming.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because if you would have asked me when I was doing it and you would have used the word spirituality, I would have rolled my eyes and, said I don't really know what you're talking about. But I think for me, there was this push to be outdoors, to be in wide open spaces, to kind of admire the wonder of this tiny little seed, nourished by rain and sun and by the work of human hands and everything else to be transformed into, something you could eat. That's a miraculous process from start to finish. And I think getting to witness it firsthand, especially, where as a society we're really largely separated from those processes and I think oftentimes try as hard as we can not to think about all the steps that get a piece of food from seed to our plate. I always had a really deep appreciation of that, and I think also there were a lot of different balances that really appealed to me about working in farming. Always getting to be part of a team and at the same time usually getting to spend a good amount of time by myself outside and doing different things felt like a really good social balance, and certainly being able to kind of, there's a lot of kind of intellectual and management challenges that go into it as well. So it wasn't just, for me, it wasn't just, my hands are working and my brain isn't, but there was always kind of puzzles to be solved, strategies to develop with other folks who I was working with. And so I guess that's a little bit less on the spiritual side, but a little bit more of kind of the wanting to fully engage in something with like body, brain, and spirit all together, which I found to be really satisfying. And then, as you kind of hinted at in my bio, once I was getting reintegrated or integrated into roles of Jewish leadership and diving into text more deeply, because of my time spent the Torah was written for an ancient Israelite agricultural society, right? That was their economy, and so there are all kinds of rules and laws and narratives that I was kind of aware of, but as a child, that's not the part that they necessarily stress to hammer home because it doesn't feel relevant to most people. But now that I was kind of coming back to it with this new set of glasses, so to speak, there were all kinds of connections and lessons to be learned that felt like, they were almost written with me in mind in a way that I hadn't seen or felt before.
Yeah, neat.
I'm interested in just fleshing out a little bit more kind of how the arc of your sort of agricultural career, sort of where it started, kind of what positions you had, what you actually did. I mean, when you were riding a tractor some of the time, that.
Yeah. So it started, in between my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college, I took a gap year.
Yeah.
And I was with a program of the conservative movement of Judaism in Israel, and we spent the first half of the year living in Jerusalem and doing Jewish study, and then the second half of the year we were living and working on a kibbutz in the southern part of the country. And so kibbutz is a kind of century-ish old social agricultural commune type arrangement, although it's evolved a lot over the last 100 years or so. And so I was assigned with a friend of mine to work with the irrigation crew on this, again, this community had, I believe, thousands of acres of land in cultivation, like big kind of mechanized farming with tractors, and they grew avocados, and but their big product was carrots. That they were one of the top 3 carrot producers in the state of Israel. And so, again, I grew up on the edge of New York City. Like, I was not a kid who had dirt on, if I had dirt under my fingernails, it was not from digging up carrots. But yeah, that was my first time kind of being really integrated not really integrated. That was my first time taking any part in the production of food other than like a couple cucumbers and cherry tomato plants we had in the backyard growing up. And I just loved it. Again, I think from the outset, just the physicality of it combined with some of those problem solving, and especially when you get to irrigation projects, there's, a little bit of engineering, there's a little bit of ingenuity, there's like a little bit of everything. So yeah, I just loved it. And then and then when I got to college at Cornell, they have great ag programs there, and I took kind of just on a whim a sustainable agriculture class and realized that I really liked that. And then when I was looking for a summer job, I have an uncle who had a house on Martha's Vineyard, which unfortunately he sold in the last couple of years, but and he's, my mom said was talking to family and said that, maybe farming was something I was interested in. He said, well, there's this farm on the vineyard that provides housing for employees, and, why don't you send in an application? And I sent in the application on a whim. I didn't hear back from them. I had taken another job at like a horticultural center in Ithaca, and then I heard back from the farm, and, I have a hard time going back on commitments, but it's just like the opportunity to kind of see what this farming thing would bring. And to spend the summer on the vineyard was kind of too good to pass up. And, that was, so I went for it. Spent 3 really rewarding summers there, kind of climbed the ranks pretty quickly to be field crew manager. So working directly with the farmer owners to kind of be the go-between as to like, they told me what they needed and what was going on in the farm, and I needed to communicate that to the 10 to 15 people who were doing the bulk of the work and hopefully lead by example along the way. That was a great experience. And then when I got back from the Peace Corps, and after I hiked the trail, I really had no idea what I was doing with my life. And so, one of the options on the table was I got back in touch with that farm on Martha's Vineyard and said, I'm kind of between things and looking for work, and they were looking for workers. So I spent a fall and early winter there and realized that this was something I was really interested in. And so from there, moved to Appleton Farms in Ipswich for a year. Again,
well-known place.
Yeah, I love Martha's Vineyard, but island life year-round wasn't quite for me. And Appleton came recommended by a friend, and then from there moved to Heron Pond Farm in Southampton, and that was where my job really shifted away from working with my hands and with the crew in a more intensive way, and there actually it was a little bit more kind of field management and tractor work for the bulk of the 4 years I was there, which was I really, really loved it. And it's still a place that, I'm still very, very good friends with the owners, and a place that's really dear to my heart.
So one thing that we left off our list of ways to enliven the spirit is travel. And in the bio, adventures in Peru, and you just mentioned the Appalachian Trail experience. So if you could share anything about how those struck you.
Yeah. I think so. If you don't mind me going one step further back, which is not on the bio, what actually sparked that Peace Corps process and journey was I spent a semester abroad my junior year in India, living on an eco village in the southern part of India through actually a UMass program, and that for me was so. First of all, that was like that was kind of my first intentional move to try to spark spiritual development. Like I realized that this was something where I didn't feel particularly strong or developed, and this program had a very explicit component of that. They did daily mindfulness, whether it was yoga or tai chi. It was about living in intentional community, and kind of studying some different spiritual practices. And again, it didn't necessarily achieve exactly what I wanted. Like, I thought I was going to come out of this with some kind of like, oh, I get it now, or this is the thing that I do every day to ground myself. And that never really happened, but it was my first time. I had traveled before, right? Like, I'd spent relatively extensive time in Israel, but that already felt like something that was so attached to who I was and what my community was. And in some ways I had already kind of had so much of that exposure. But so going to India for the first time was the thing that opened my eyes to, like, holy cow, there's a whole nother world out there, and people and cultures that are so drastically different from what I kind of ever, certainly, I knew it was out there, but I'd just never been exposed to it. And it was that experience that really made me want to join the Peace Corps and see more of the world, and really figure out how I could relate to more of the world, especially with an eye on kind of sustainability and stepping back from the American experience a little bit, and seeing what things are like in places that are not as economically developed, or that don't have all the resources that I've been lucky enough to have at my fingertips for my entire life. And so that, yeah, I would say those two experiences are a little bit different from the Appalachian Trail experience, just in terms of wanting to relate to more and different parts of humanity, and really being able to broaden my own perspective. The Appalachian Trail was kind of what I needed at the end. So with the Peace Corps, I was in Peru for about 2.5 years, or 2 years and 3 months total, I think. And then after that, I spent another 2 months traveling in Chile and Argentina, just because they write you a check when you finish the Peace Corps. You're already in South America. You may as well take advantage a little bit. And I didn't come home that entire time. My parents came to visit, some family and friends came to visit, but I was out of the U.S. and really only in South America for that whole time. And so the Peace Corps was really the Appalachian Trail was really more with an eye on kind of taking some time to reintegrate and to kind of have, nothing in front of me but a literal path to walk for a couple months, and figure out kind of how I was going to incorporate the time that I just spent in South America into my life, and process kind of the relationships I had built there, and the time I had spent there, and give me some time to kind of think a little bit more expansively about what might come next, or at least to be able to kind of do all that without really any other obligations besides, what are you going to eat? Where are you going to sleep? Is it going to rain?
Really? Yeah. So let me just say, I'm really struck by your saying that I didn't have much of a spiritual life, and then it started really growing in later years. But part of spirituality to me is, what's life about? What am I about? What's it all for? And I'm really feeling that that's been a thread throughout your life.
Yeah, I think it has too. And I think this is, I think what the point that you're making, I think, exemplifies some of the struggles that we have with organized religion, right? Where it feels like if it's not coming from the explicit religious practices that I have developed or been devoted to or learning about, then it can't possibly be spiritual, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I'm even just thinking about, since we're talking about the trail so much, like I can think about times where I was, you know, walking down a trail in massive woods and all I can see is trees and filtered sunlight and there's no other people around, and like I remember the beauty and the awe of that moment. And I think in that moment as a 20-something and as a 20-something who had such like a kind of strong core Jewish identity as I did, because it wasn't an explicitly Jewish experience, I had a hard time recognizing it as a spiritual experience, because in my mind I really wanted those things to be one and the same. And I think there are ways, again, with the experience of 10 years of hindsight and 4 years of rabbinical school, like I think there are ways in which I could, not only for myself, but possibly even counsel others in reconciling that tension and that disconnect. I don't think it needs to be a disconnect in any way, but I think that was a block that held for me for a while. And, you know, I do certainly think, looking back, that, again, even if it's not language I would have used or identified with in the moment, I think I agree with you that these were all parts of my own spiritual development, and that I was finding things that spoke to me on a really deeper sense in those moments and in these adventures.
Sure sounds that way to me.
I think one of the things that struck me going back to when you were talking about farming and how we've, in our society, we've really gotten divorced from all the steps that take place from the seed planted in the ground to getting to the table, and that for me, I think that a lot of my sense of spirituality has to do with interconnectedness, and that a lot of what you're saying seems to reflect that theme in your own life. Being able to move toward a perspective which is kind of ever increasing, whether that's really diving into farming and how food is produced, or really trying to connect with the human race on a basis that's much larger and more expansive than what we grew up with in New York State. It's so I'm wondering if that kind of has any sort of resonance with you as you look back at your development.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think food specifically, and I don't know if this directly addresses your prompt here, but I think food specifically is just a really powerful potential connector. My actual course of studies at Cornell, my degree is in natural resource management, because I had kind of I had an academic interest in the environment and in working with the environment, but it was my work in agriculture that made me realize, like, actually it's really hard to get people to care about, people might not interact with waterways on a daily basis that they can recognize, right? Or they might not care about, the extinction of some small endangered species that they have never encountered and unfortunately never will. But whatever else is going on in your life, like, you're sitting down to eat multiple times a day. And that felt to me like the way in which people, the way in which everyone, it's not the only way, but one of the most powerful ways in which everyone is forced to interact with the natural world on a daily basis is through food. And so that just felt like such a great basic common denominator that connected me in a really powerful way. And I think, we see it even on the pretty micro and local scales all around us. And if you want to talk about connectedness, like connectedness within this specific topic, I met my wife at the Newburyport Farmers Market when I was working as a vendor for Heron Pond Farm, and she was working for another farm in Amesbury, and just kind of cruising the market doing some market research, as she said. And so like that ability to kind of bring people together and bring people into relationship and communication with each other. She is a farmer, and she sells down there every Sunday at the Newburyport Farmers Market, and like I do my best to make it down there every Sunday morning, not just to see her, which I'm always happy to do, but also, to see people from around town and to kind of keep that community feel and relationships alive. I think, for all the things we do that are really increasingly insular, all the time we spend looking down at screens and not talking to the people around us, like having a community gathering point where you really can't be doing anything else but looking up, being part of the crowd around you, talking to the vendors and other customers, getting recipe recommendations, hearing about how they make what they make or how they grow what they grow. If you want to talk about like local opportunities for connection, I don't know if I can think of a better one around these parts than something like the farmers market. And that's to say nothing of the opportunity that food brings, when we cook, when we invite people over, when we, when we sit down to have a meal together, and the food is kind of the glue that, sparks conversation and interaction. And again, to say nothing of, to find an opportunity for a moment of appreciation and gratitude for, the food we eat, the people whose work went into producing it, the person who cooked it, all of those things.
Another form of connection, particularly you were talking earlier about your world was the Jewish community and practice. You're on the clergy council, and we had talked earlier about interfaith, so you're having a lot of dealings with other religious practices and spiritual practices. And also in rabbinical school, we talked a little bit before about, different people coming from different places to study, to be a spiritual leader. So either or both of those connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, having whatever, the more exposure that I can get to the way different people in the Jewish world, in the Christian world, and those are obviously where the majority of people I interact with are, but Muslim world, non-believers, whatever it might be, having more exposure to those belief systems and more conversations about, how do you deal with this specific passage, or what does it mean to you, or what is your practice around gratitude, what is your ritual around prayer, all of these things, when they exist in conversation with each other, that serves, when it comes from a place of genuine intrigue and exchange of ideas, what's right and wrong, or what any individual thinks is right or wrong, really falls to the wayside, but it becomes a tool for, development, interchange, letting kind of different influences in that actually kind of, lifts all boats, as it were.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, really enriching. I was talking with you a little bit about my uncle Thomas Keating and his interest in interspirituality, and that he was well known, and he was invited to a lot of big conferences, and he hated them because they were very academic, and this is our dogma, and so he started his own little conference of well-known spiritual leaders, and that they just talked about what they actually did in their practice and tried other people's on for size in, the week-long conference. And it went on for like over 20 years, I think. And it's really, I think, exactly, mirroring what you were saying about the enrichment that we can get by really understanding, and that he ended up, one of my favorite things that he said was understanding other spiritual traditions is not enough. We need to love them. And that you only get that from really diving in and actually getting some experiential basis of what people are doing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think for me, in this moment, right, as I'm on the cusp of graduation, that's kind of one of the big question marks for me coming up, just in terms of, I think school really has been the impetus for me to, go somewhere else outside of the community and be exposed to different, whether it is in the academia, whether it is with the other students. Hebrew College also has the Miller Center, which is dedicated to interreligious work and conversation and spiritual development. So yeah, I think one of the big questions for me now that I will no longer be a student and will kind of be more focused on being a rabbi and being a rabbi in this community is, how do I kind of keep exposing myself to new things? Because I think school was like the easy outlet for, all right, X number of days a week, Alex, you're going to go to Newton and you're going to be learning new things and meeting new people and getting exposed. So I think the question is, what does that look like without kind of having that easy almost valve to rely on? Joel mentioned the clergy council. I think there's a lot of great opportunity for us to work together in town and to exchange ideas, to invite each other to services and to build some of that idea exchange. I think we're all still kind of coming out of our insular COVID boxes and need to figure out kind of on both sides, how do we manage our individual congregations and their needs after we still in this process of recreating the wheel a little bit. But my hope is that I'm really lucky to have really great clergy to serve as thought partners and practice partners in town, and I'm hoping that for us personally and for the communities we represent, that we can continue to kind of have that sort of exchange of ideas and lived practice that you were talking about.
It's beautiful.
One of my high points with you, Alex, and with the Newburyport Jewish community, was how it came about that we considered you to be our spiritual leader. Do you mind if I share my interpretation of that experience?
I might start blushing a little bit, but you can go for it, Joel.
Okay, so this is my story. You correct me. We had a 19-year part-time older rabbi traveling from far away to lead us. Then we had a couple of intermediates. Then we had 4 or 5 years of a young, dynamic rabbi who had young kids and wanted, as they were ready for school, to have more of an experience like you had of a Jewish day school. So they left. And another young rabbi came along, dynamic, young kids. 3 years or thereabouts later, same story, he left. So we have this congregation meeting, and we say, what are we going to do? We take a senior, semi-retired, older rabbi and go through that experience? Or do we have a young, dynamic rabbi and go through losing them again because of their kids? Going back and forth, long debate, discussion. I'm sitting next to the most recent of those rabbis who left. And I'm about to say to him, what do you think about Alex? Because Alex had been serving as kind of an assistant rabbi, filling in when the rabbi was away or was doing other things, and doing a great job. And the next thing I hear is the meeting's about to end. Alex says, well, can I offer, I'm considering rabbinical school. Might you be interested in a student rabbi or spiritual leader? And it was like, wow. Everybody's like, yes. Okay, your version of it.
No, that is as good a retelling of that story as I would hope for.
Okay.
And I will also say, since I'm sitting, right across from you right now, Joel, the part of the reason that I got involved there in the first place, and I don't remember if you remember this or not, but actually in between those two young dynamic rabbis, you were in charge of, I don't know if you were in charge, but you were helping. There was like a month where services needed to be accounted for in between when one contract ended and the next one picked up. And you came up to me, I think you knew this through, your own connections at Heron Pond Farm, but you came up to me at the farmer's market one Sunday and almost completely cold asked me if I would be interested in coming to help lead services one Shabbat morning. And so like the first time that I kind of ever stepped foot in CAA as just a regular kind of layperson was to lead services at your behest. So that history goes back a little bit farther. Yeah, the process of me stepping into that role is one that is, as far as I know, pretty unusual certainly in the Jewish rabbinic world, and I think generally in the clergy world. It was a, pun intended, leap of faith on both sides. For me, just in, starting a completely new career path and going back to school, which is something I don't think that I had, I would not say that I had some lifelong calling to be a rabbi, and even kind of the language of calling really doesn't resonate with me in terms of choosing this as a career path. And certainly for the congregation, I had done okay, I think, in those substitute roles for Rabbi Ben, but we didn't really know, what my potential would be, and we still don't. We're 4 years into an
Yes, we
experiment.
do. Yes, we do.
Well, but yeah, and a lot of this for me. My wife grew up in Newbury. She has really deep ties here. I've built really deep ties here, and generally, have found a lot of things that I really love about the greater Newburyport community and the greater Newburyport Jewish community. We don't have kids, at least not yet, so we don't have to struggle with that same question that my two predecessors did. But I think one of the things that I am still kind of in a stage of pushing back against a little bit from my own upbringing is that really kind of insular parochial education. Again, I really appreciate everything it gave me, but I think it's important that there is support and resources and growth and excitement for kids to grow up in a religious context where that is part of all the other things that builds their identity and their family's identity, and not kind of the end all be all. And especially, and these are conversations that I have that I actually are ongoing with my friends who I'm still in touch with from growing up. I mean, the schools that I went to were as part of the modern Orthodox world were not egalitarian. And so the notion that some of my friends who do have kids are sending them to the same schools that I grew up in, and I just it's hard for me to get my head around the gender imbalances and inequities that are baked into Orthodox Judaism. And that's probably one of the things that I struggle most with looking back on my own childhood and upbringing, and just like can't understand how that is still a system that parents want to buy their families into in the year 2023. And so, yeah, maybe I'm a little bit far afield at this point, but yeah, I mean, I have really loved the work that I've been able to do over the last 4 years with CAA, and I'm really excited to kind of see what it looks like going forward.
Me too. You have anything before we ask the wrap-up question?
You can ask the wrap-up question.
Okay. So the wrap-up question is, anything you'd like to share with our audience about ways to lift the spirit? And I must say that you've given a lot of those already.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sitting here and just kind of, watching the breeze flip the blinds a little bit and seeing the clear blue sky and the sunshine, and I think what that's bringing to me is just to remind folks that even like a brief or fleeting moment of peace, of appreciation, of gratitude, of kind of absorbing what's beautiful or feeding you in the world around you, like that is such a worthwhile endeavor to try to find on a daily basis. And this is something, Joel, I'm not going to even try to paraphrase you, but certainly something, the times that we have meditated together, something that I've gotten from you, right? It's not about all the moments that you're not feeling it. It's about kind of just deep appreciation and gratitude for whatever moments you can grasp when you are feeling it, and really letting those buoy you through and sink deeply into your day. And so just being open to kind of the brief glimpses and not getting discouraged if it feels like you're waiting for that to take over 24/7.
Yeah. Great.
Excellent, great message. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Anything you'd like to say before we wrap it up?
No, I don't think so. I'm really grateful for both of you for having me and for keeping these kinds of conversations going within the communal dialogue. It's really wonderful to have this kind of outlet.
Well, it's great having you here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks
Alex.
for all that you've shared about your rich journey. So many facets of what touches me, what has meaning to me, and how do I bring those together in some way. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Is there a conclusion?
Conclusion. There are ways to view or listen to this conversation. So if you go to Media Hub and look for their YouTube link or their SoundCloud link, it's available. And next month we're going to have Dawn Boyer, who is my gospel choir leader, who's also a writer and an artist. So lots of ways to lift the spirit. Thanks for listening, watching. Have a good day.
Thank you all.